Welcome to Perspectives El Paso. I'm Professor Leon Blevins of El Paso Community College Television. On the way to this studio about an hour ago, I was passing Eastwood High School. A car pulls out of a parking place in front of me, and I noticed it looked like it was an old car, needed a new paint job. And then there was a historical license plate on it, and it showed it was a 1953 classic car. And I saw the logo, it's Chevrolet, 1953. When I got to the studio here, I called back and talked to my wife a minute, and I said, when did you and your family move to El Paso? And she said the first time was about 1952. And I told her about seeing that car. And I said, I'm going to do a TV interview with David Grabitske, who is the new director at the Museum of History here in El Paso. And I said they just had a reception last night and opening an exhibit today about what they brought with them, what people brought with them when they came to El Paso. And so my wife has a long history with El Paso. My history is not that long. David, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
You're not driving a 1953 automobile, are you?
No, I'm not. I have a 2017.
Up to date, up to date.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to El Paso. When did you come as the new director of the museum?
I started on July 24th this year, so I've been here a little over 3 months.
Okay, well, this is a conversation. Then tell me about your background, a little bit of your background and where you came from to here for this job.
Well, sure. I'm a native of St. Paul, Minnesota, and I grew up in Maryland. My dad had a job out there, and so the family lived there for a while, and before they relocated us back to Minnesota, and went to school through college and so on. I worked for a number of small historical organizations and also worked for the Daughters of the American Revolution before I came to the Minnesota Historical Society, where I was for the last 21 years.
Did you have a college degree in history?
I do. That's my undergraduate.
Okay. And what areas of specialization?
American history, particularly the early Republic and the Trans-Appalachian West.
Well, I know that you're going to find El Paso a fascinating place. As I've mentioned on this show many times, I've loved teaching here. I just retired after 44 years at community college, but I love the military history, the Native American history, the Spanish history, the Mexican history, the Anglo history, the railroad history. The place is full of it.
Yes, it is.
And that's why, I remember when the first museum was built with regard to history of El Paso. It was just like a little tourist stop out at the edge of town, on the east side of town on Interstate 10. And so many of us lobbied for years to get a nice downtown museum of history. Eventually a bond issue was passed, quality of life and all of this, and it was built what you are now working in. How do you find it?
Yeah, it's a 2007 building. It does its job very well, it holds its climate quite well, and the lighting is good. Collections are well cared for and well presented. So it's a good investment that the community has made, and they continue to invest in it because attendance remains strong and people continue to use it. Now,
what were the major exhibits that were set up when you first got here?
Well, when I first got here, I landed in the middle of an exhibit installation with the Circle of Giants committee that chooses a new community-based exhibit every year to honor the giants of our past. That one is called First Steps, a commemoration of St. Patrick Cathedral and Cathedral High School. And that one opened on August 19th. So starting on July 24th, I got right into the swing of things immediately. Yeah.
So you're on a learning curve. You didn't know about Cathedral High School. You didn't know about these giants of El Paso history and so on. So you have a lot to learn, and isn't that wonderful?
It is wonderful. Every day that you learn something is a profitable day.
And now what are your major events that you have set up, besides the brand new one you just opened up about what they brought?
Yeah, we just opened what we brought last night in a members reception. And that one, as you were saying, is all about the strength of the collection that's at the History Museum. Whether you grew up here and decided to stay, or you left for a little while and decided to return, or like me or many others in El Paso, you decided to come live here, those are all choices, and you wind up bringing stuff.
Right.
You know, whether it's mail order or it's packing up your car to come to El Paso. You can't bring it all, so you have to make choices,
Right.
and there are selections. And so what's on exhibit are what people valued and then subsequently brought to El Paso.
Is there some kind of catalog or inventory on the internet or something about what exhibits that are traveling that can come to El Paso that you're interested in bringing?
Oh, there are many traveling exhibition services from the Smithsonian to Mid-America Arts Alliance and many others. Texas Humanities, I believe, has a really good selection. So we are looking at all of those and seeing what's possible to bring here, what will fit the curriculum and fit the theme that we have really developed, which is choosing El Paso, because that's the one thing that binds all of us together.
We're kind of in an isolated spot with regard to the rest of Texas. A lot of Texans, they don't even recognize us, or in the articles they write, they don't realize that we are in Texas instead of New Mexico. You go to symposiums and you go to conferences. Have you done some in Texas where you were given a little view of what we have in the state of Texas, like the Bob Bullock Texas History Museum?
I was lucky enough to go to the American Association for State and Local History conference this year in September.
Okay.
It was in Austin, Texas. It moves around quite a bit. They had very strong attendance. It was the second highest that they had recorded. The highest was when I hosted it in St. Paul in 2014, but they were very close. And it's a very good conference, and was able to see the Bob Bullock. I was able to see the Johnson Presidential Library and a number of other historic places around Austin.
We had a German exchange student live with us a little over 10 years ago, I guess, and he had a stereotype of Texas, and America for that matter, and he had seen a lot of Western movies on television in Germany. So when he came to El Paso, he was expecting to see the Old West. Did you get those stereotypes in Minnesota and where you were growing up about Texas?
Well, I don't know. My mother, of course, was born here in Texas, in Fort Worth.
Oh, okay.
More accident of World War II than of heritage.
Okay.
My grandfather had been drafted in June of 1941, so just months ahead of the Pearl Harbor event.
Goodness.
And he came down in June, and my grandmother came down to visit him in August, and they got married right then and there. And my mother came along then in 1944 during the war.
So you got a little Texas tie there.
A little bit, yeah. So, my grandparents traveled quite a bit. A lot of Grandpa's Army buddies lived in Texas, and so my mother and her family would travel the country, and they went to many places, and I know they came here to Texas at least once, and that. So, I don't know. I think everywhere has that same problem. Certainly with Minnesota, you tend to think of a Swedish stereotype.
Right, exactly.
When it's more of a Germanic state.
Now, your background, your family background is Polish?
Yeah, the family surname is certainly Polish, but probably the vast majority of my ancestry is German.
Okay. Now, did they save any of those things? Like my mother saved some of the old stamps, rationing stamps from World War II. I was asked to do a program at Ascardy Elementary where my wife went to school. Right about the time of their 70th anniversary, I was invited to come down there and do a program about World War II. So I took some of those items, the old sugar coupons and things of that nature. Did your family save any of those historical things that you found interesting?
Yeah, there's a number of things. I had an ancestor who was a cobbler in New York, and I've got some of his tools for making shoes. I've got a passport for my double great-grandmother who never naturalized, and so during World War I, she needed a passport to travel from St. Paul, Minnesota to St. Cloud, Minnesota.
Oh my goodness.
And I've got, my dad's barracks cap from when he was in the Air Force. I think, when you're working in history, the rest of the family figures you're probably the person that's best suited to carry on those things. And you talk about military, and I had a double great-grandfather who served in the German Army in 1871, and so I've got his papers from that event when he
That is history.
That is history, yeah.
Several years ago, maybe 10 years ago or so, I went to the museum downtown where you are now, and walked in dressed as Abraham Lincoln. I'd been invited to come down as Lincoln. I had to darken my beard, and I couldn't make my height anymore. But the lady that greeted me, I don't know if she's part-time or volunteer. I don't think she was full-time. And she asked, "Oh my goodness, what have you got doing? What's your big project right now?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing my autobiography. I'm almost finished with my autobiography." And I said, "I've had an interesting history, interesting family, and all of those things." And here's what she said that struck me, and you'll appreciate this. She said, "Oh, my grandfather just died in Mexico. I'd love to go down there in the summer, and he would sit there and we'd get at his feet and he'd tell us these wonderful stories about Mexican history. And he's dead now, and all the stories are gone." Isn't that one of the saddest things to hear?
Yeah.
That people did not save their stories?
Yeah, well, I've worked in the museum field, history field a long time, and I think one of the things that impresses me about what we call history is that it's a winnowing process. That there are things that we should have saved and didn't. There are things that we should have saved and we did. There are things that we shouldn't have saved, and yet we saved them anyway. And then there are all those things that we shouldn't have saved but didn't save, which is probably a blessing.
I wish I'd saved my comic books from the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah, probably like I wish I had saved all my Star Wars figures and toys from the 70s.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, what other things? What have you found about El Paso? Have you been to Juarez yet? Have you had any meetings over there?
Yeah, I've not had a chance to go there yet. See it every day, of course.
Yeah.
But no, I think for El Paso, probably the thing that impresses me most are its people. And I think the people here are the greatest asset that the city has.
Exactly, I agree with that.
Yeah.
There's a Fort Bliss replica of old El Paso and Fort Bliss. You need to get out there and see that. I had Wanda Kinzel, I believe is her name, the curator there, on this show a number of years ago. And there's a little interesting museum out there about the history of Fort Bliss. And go to Columbus, New Mexico sometime. You've heard about the Pancho Villa raid?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a colleague named Albert Burnham. He came down from Minnesota. He was a historical reenactor in Custer battles and things of that nature up there in the Dakotas and Minnesota. And he came here, and the first trip I took him on, I said, "I want to drive you over to Columbus, New Mexico, where Pancho Villa raided just before World War I. And so you need to get over there. I'm giving you hints.
Yes.
Historical place to go. It's a very small museum over there of Columbus, New Mexico.
Yeah.
And on it goes.
Well, practically every weekend we try to get our kids out to see something new. Of course, there's a few places in town that they've already discovered that, Dad, we got to go back to the archaeology museum. My boys love that, or the zoo, which is what my daughter loves the most.
How old are your children?
They're 8, 6, and 3.
Okay, just the ripe age to get them out there and all these exciting and interesting things before they got all engaged with teenage friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Before they become too smart for me.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's great. Well, what about your family circle, your background, that you recall some things like this? The woman was talking about her grandfather down in Mexico. When you were in St. Paul and Minnesota, these other areas, what were things that really struck your imagination when they would tell you some of their stories?
Well, I'm the oldest of the oldest in my family, kinda. If you think about it, I'm the oldest child for my parents. Both of my parents are their oldest children. And I'm the oldest grandchild, both sides. Okay. And so I spent a lot of time growing up with my grandparents and their siblings. And so storytelling was always a part of the family. You'd sit around playing cards, often cribbage or euchre were among the two more common games that we played, and particularly all the uncles, because my grandmother was one of 6 and the only girl in the family, so we had a lot of uncles in the family, and they would tell us stories. And I remember my mother's oldest brother, Ernie, who was born in 1908, and he was telling about being a young man and having a Pierce Arrow automobile, and which was old at the time he bought it, and he had come somehow into possession of several cases worth of Kewpie dolls, and so he went all over to different carnivals and so on. So he drove up to Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, to do a fair there. And today it would take you about 4 hours by modern freeway. So you can imagine how long it would take on back roads in an old Pierce Arrow. And he took his brother Herb along on it as well. Herb had to stand on the running board because they had a little problem with the carburetor that they couldn't fix, and so Herb
This generation doesn't know about running boards.
No, but he had a little glass of gas, which is very dangerous if you think about it. And Herb would have to splash a little bit of gas into the carburetor periodically to keep the car going.
I've done that when I was young with my mother.
Yeah, and so they had gone to this fair, and they hadn't earned enough money to pay for their booth, and so they cut town early and didn't pay their bill because they didn't have any money.
Oh, my.
And they were worried that the sheriff was after them and so on. And it was a very hot day. And in Minnesota, it can get up, in the upper 90s, low hundreds pretty easily. And this is, I think, probably early 30s, Depression era. And the tube inside the tire, which we don't have tubes inside of tires anymore, radial tire. My Uncle Ernie always insisted the radial tire was one of the best inventions ever made. He said because that day, as they were fleeing, he driving down the roads and so on, it got so hot that the glue on the patch on the tube inside the tire kept slipping off, and so the tire would blow periodically, and they'd have to go out into the cornfield and find it, and then patch it, and then put it back on, and this process went on all day long. And he said they got back to Como Park, which is kind of like Central Park in New York, but this is in St. Paul. And that was the last time the tire blew, and he and Herb gave up and had enough, and they walked home from there. So that was another hour to walk from there. And so the stories that these men would tell about days gone by and things that were just hard to imagine just captured my attention and
well, I think
held it.
I think to some extent that's what a history museum is about too, is storytelling, and having different groups and individuals come in, and the children come in or adults come in and share some of these things. Now you see the background I put up for us today. Mandy the Mule, that's a part of El Paso history. Transportation history. The Sun Bowl, sports and entertainment history. San Jacinto Plaza, used to have real alligators there. And sometimes people were abusing them, so now it's a sculpture there. The first Thanksgiving reenactment, 1598. It's a reenactment now of what happens there, Don Juan de Oñate. And I've performed as Don Juan de Oñate in that production in the past. And then we have Fort Bliss, Old Fort Bliss, 1848. Mount Cristo Rey. In the past, I've walked up to the top there to see that statue. You can see it from your office area. And then the engine number 1, transportation, railroad history. And then the missions, Esaleta Mission, 1682. The mother mission of all of them is over in Juarez. And so then you have Esaleta, you have Socorro, and you have a Presidio and a chapel down at San Elizario. Have you made any of those stops?
Oh yeah, San Jacinto Plaza. My kids, the boys in particular, really love the statue of the alligators there. It's kind of thrilling, and of course Mandy. We've got a statue of her it had been up in A to Z exhibit that was up when I first arrived. And she'll be back. We'll plan on doing something to commemorate this restart of the streetcars here in El Paso.
Oh, that's bringing back history, bringing in the streetcars.
Well, that's kind of my philosophy on history. History is really the story of what's possible because it's a record of what people have done. And here, the city and the electric company and everyone else has reached into the past and found something that we can make a brighter tomorrow. By using the streetcars, and that's really the power of history. We transform the future as much as we are a record of the past.
And even the Plaza Theater that my wife can remember when it was a segregated theater, a classic Art Deco kind of theater, and then it deteriorated and was brought back by the Community Foundation. A number of people that I know were involved in that. Have you had a chance to go to any programs there yet?
Not a program, but I have been in the building. It's a wonderful restoration.
It has a historic organ there in the building. So you need to.
Yeah.
I have so many things I want you to do.
Yeah, I know. And so far, almost every weekend, we've tried to go out and see something new.
Right.
Like I said, there have been a few repeats because the kids fall in love with certain things.
Right. Now, I've had some guests on this show, including a man named Charlie Min that does documentary films, and that they fell in love with El Paso. And Charlie now says, well, he's from New York City, but he says, now I'm an El Pasoan. So at some stage, maybe we'll find that you have slipped over into that you find this climate down here, the friendliness of the people that are here, all of these things that are here that involve history that you can find and appreciate. And so maybe someday you'll be thinking of yourself as a Texan, and especially since your mother was from Fort Worth.
Oh, sure.
Any other words that you'd like to share about the organization you're now working with? I want to give you a chance to put up a telephone number or website number or whatever it is.
Oh, sure.
So people can contact you and find out how to get on your list, how to join. Tell us about that.
Right. So visit us online at history.elpasotexas.gov. That's our website, and you can sign up to become a member of the museum. Members make it happen at the El Paso Museum of History. The city supports the organization to a certain level, but members take us to the next one.
Okay.
So do become a member, and I know you're a member, so thank you. It's growing, and since I've been here, membership has more than doubled. So it's a growing movement. And
just since you've been here?
Just since I've been here,
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's really grown quite well. And so take a chance to go online and sign up to become a member.
Okay.
You can call us as well at 915-212-0320, and we can help you there. Come down our regular hours, 9 to 5 most days, Tuesdays through Saturday, and then open, of course, on Thursday nights till 9, and on Sunday from 12 to 5. So we have 4 regular exhibit up right now. What We Brought is our newest one, just opened last night, and we have the first steps with the Circle of Giants on view until February 18th. And then upstairs are more permanent exhibits, the Changing Past, which is a timeline of the last 450 years roughly, and then we have a great neighborhoods exhibit about Secunda Barrio and Chihuahuita.
Have you worked in other history museums besides in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area, and then here? Were there any other operations you went to?
So all of the ones that I've worked at have been in Minnesota prior to here. I've done some consulting work. I also help the Institute for Museums and Library Services go evaluate museums. For whatever reason, I get to go to Alaska quite a bit for that program. So I've been to many parts of Alaska, including Barrow, in December of 2012. So it was a time when the sun didn't shine at all. The entire week I was there.
Well, you're having to upgrade skills constantly with technology, aren't you?
Yeah, and you know, the El Paso Museum of History is really blessed to be one of the most technologically advanced history museums in the world. It has one of 3 digital walls that currently exist in the world. I know there are several more that are slated to come online in the coming months and years ahead. We are the largest wall physically, and also the largest number of unique users, almost double the next largest digital wall in terms of unique users. So we have over 1,200, and there's about 700 in Copenhagen, which is the next nearest one.
Oh my goodness. I was in an event at the Mexican consulate office about a year and a half ago, and met a couple of the people with your operation, and their specialization is working with the digital wall and the technology associated with that. They gave me their cards, and I don't remember their names. I'd have to refer back to their business cards. But to me, that's exciting.
It is.
Because I was just told by Jenny Harone, who is vice president over these operations, that just a little bit ago we were talking about books, and she said it's hard to find people who even want books anymore, even if you give them books, because they want everything electronic. So it's a different world we're living in.
Yeah, it is, and it's a fascinating and amazing world too. We have posted a few weeks ago to our Facebook account a short video clip it was time lapsed. It goes the real time was about 12 minutes, but it goes by in a minute or so.
Yeah.
But it shows about 20 kids from one class, and they accessed in those 12 minutes 3,000 objects out of that digital wall. And so they were learning about
Oh, my word.
all kinds of things with El Paso. And you could see on their faces, oh, here's one thing, and here's another thing, and just learning and exploring and getting to know the value of their community.
Yeah, a search and exploration. I found that as a history major. My first major was history, then I switched in a master's program to political science. But to me, history was like a search, finding new things. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I never found out about that. And then add to that another area. I took different histories, like Russian history, English history, as well as American history. Took Civil War history.
Yeah.
There's just so much to know. You have to kind of narrow down.
Yeah.
And that's what you have done now.
Yeah, my Civil War instructor was a guy named Mickey Croce, and he grew up in Washington, D.C., so we had a little bit in common that way, because I grew up near there. And but Mickey grew up at a time, he was a paper boy, and he delivered papers on Embassy Row. And in those days, the paper boys had to collect the money to pay for those papers. And he said that a lot of these old men on Embassy Row would make him sit and listen to stories. Well, it turns out that most of these guys were Civil War veterans. And so they were telling him stories about the Civil War, and that's what kind of propelled him into it. And he had probably the best undergraduate class I've ever taken, because he had real stories from the people who lived it.
That's wonderful. Well, we have about a minute left. Any last word about the History Museum?
Well, we're constantly growing and constantly changing. Come out often and sign up for those memberships and let us know what you think.
Okay. Well, David, glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Professor.
And as you know, I'll be in and out from time to time. If I can help you anyway, let me know.
Please do.
Okay, thank you. There we are, another show called Perspectives El Paso. Here we are in November 2017. Tune in for another program.